Hey, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? Maybe. Hey, everybody. I'm gonna give it a minute just to let some people join in. So if you guys don't know me, Devin Knotts here with Football Guys. Um, just gonna do a quick breakdown of for the Football Guys retreat. So I don't have any of my equipment, but we're gonna do some live streams here throughout the weekend. Sigmund and Cecil, I'll get those guys added in at some point. I think they're all having breakfast at the moment, but I just wanted to jump on here and kind of just talk through some of these games today as we're getting ready. So, you guys have questions throughout. You guys have questions, yeah. Don't retreat. Charge ahead. Exactly. If you guys have questions, feel free to ask them. I'm just going to be building some lineups here over the next 30 minutes. I also do our rushing and passing matchups that we send out over email. So very, very up to date with what's going on throughout the day and really throughout the weekend. But let's start with the first game of the day. So Minnesota and San Francisco. So the key here is Minnesota's secondary is incredibly banged up. I think that the key for San Francisco to win this game is going to be through the air. George Kittle is a tough matchup. To answer Pablo's question, I prefer Kelce. Kittle's going to have Harrison Smith and Anthony Harris all over him. So just looking at, let me pull it up real quick, but looking at tight ends, I believe San Francisco's bottom five against tight ends, allowing, they've allowed the fifth fewest. They're allowing 35 yards per game. Comparing that to Houston, who's allowing the 10th most at 56 yards per game. So I like Kelce's matchup. I'm not that concerned with the injury that he has. But I think the key for San Francisco this weekend is Emmanuel Sanders and Deebo Samuel. I think that those guys, you look at Minnesota, and Xavier Rhodes has been one of, if not the worst corners in football this year, which has been a surprise after they gave him all that money. But it's a bad situation. They were trying out. I read a story this morning. They're trying out Terrence Newman, who's 41 years old and a coach on the team. So if they're going with that, Andrew Sendejo is moving into the slot. He's not really a slot corner. So Trey Waynes and Xavier Rhodes on the outside against Samuel and Sanders, I think is going to be a long day for Minnesota. The running backs, they're all right. I prefer Mostert, but I think the big advantage here from a matchup standpoint is at the wide receiver position. Looking at the other side of the ball, I think that a great matchup. I think Sherman will see a lot of Thielen, and Diggs. Thielen looked okay, but he had stitches in his ankle at the end of the game last week, which is a concern. I think that is something to keep an eye on. Thielen had over 100 yards last week, and for the first time in a long time looked healthy. Bryce, to answer your question, is playing both with tight end and flex worth considering? I'm assuming you're saying Kittle and Kelce. Could you do it? I don't think it's the worst idea. I think it could work, but it's not something that I'm doing. Just looking at Kittle's price, he's 6,200 on DraftKings. On DraftKings, it's better than FanDuel. I think on FanDuel, he's too expensive at 7,500, something like that. He's 7,400 on FanDuel. So if you're going to do it, I'm okay with doing it on DraftKings. I think that both should. Kittle's going to get his targets. I just prefer Kelce because of the matchup. So I do like Andrews a lot, especially since Marquise Brown really hasn't been involved. looking at the Ravens, and we'll jump into that game here soon. Let's just go ahead and jump into it now. So, looking at the Ravens offense, how are they going to move the ball? Well, Mark Ingram is less than 100%. It looks like he's going to play. I think it would be a shocker if he didn't. Marquise Brown has a tough matchup with Adoree Jackson, who's one of the only corners who can keep. And looking at what the Titans have done over the last several weeks, let me pull it up really quickly. But talking about Andrews, how do the Ravens move the ball? Well, Tennessee has given up the fourth most fantasy points to opposing tight ends this year. 57 yards per game, 0.6 touchdowns per game. So they've given up 84 yards and 2 touchdowns to Jared Cook. They gave up 73 yards to Darren Waller, 73 yards to Jack Doyle with a touchdown, 75 with a touchdown to Travis Kelce. Hunter Henry had 100 yards. Austin Hooper had 130 yards. So they've given up big games to tight ends. Adoree is banged up, yeah, but unless I missed something, he's playing this week. He was off the injury report as of Friday, so I think he's good to go. For them to remove him as limited, he wasn't even limited or questionable heading into this week. So, yeah, Ingram is interesting on that 2-game slate. I think a lot of people are going to overlook him just because people are scared off on how many touches he's going to get, but he could definitely see 12 to 15 touches and score 2 touchdowns. So I think that from an ownership perspective, I think that's a great play. Michael Price, any Niners running backs? I like Mostert. I think that he's cash viable. I think he's a guy that he's just getting the touches, and his price isn't terrible at 5,800 on DraftKings and 60 something on FanDuel. I'm pulling it up now. 6,700 on FanDuel. So I think on both sites he's fine. I don't really like I said earlier, Tevin Coleman just doesn't get the touches that he should. Other questions here. Can Kansas City cover? Also thinking the over. Bernie Harrison. What is the line? What is the latest line on that one? It is up to Kansas City -10. Coming into the week, I had it at 27-21. So to me, that tells me I like the Texans, but I think we'll get into that game in a minute. But to me, it's is Will Fuller playing? So before I would put a bet on that, I think that looking at is Fuller going to play? Carlos Hyde in cash, yes. I think that he's getting the touches, especially on FanDuel, where he's a great price. But in cash this week at running back, I'm just looking for consistency. I'm looking for touches. 5,400, Ben Jones, wide receiver. What site are you looking at, buddy? As more of these questions come in, let's just keep going through and breaking down some of these other games. So we broke down Baltimore just really quickly. Going to jump into Tennessee here in a second. So Tennessee, the question is going to be, do you play Derrick Henry? Obviously, if you're in a no salary cap or a playoff fantasy type format, you do, considering this might be the last time to use him since Baltimore should win this game. But looking at the matchup, it's far from ideal. So from a DFS perspective, I think the prices, especially in a cash game format, is going to be really difficult to spend up with him. We'll get into who my guy is, and that's Aaron Jones. I like Dalvin Cook. Looking at Baltimore, they have allowed, 3 running backs this year to top 100 yards, and that was Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon, and Raheem Mostert. And Chubb did it with a long run. They've shut down some really good running backs as well. They've shut down Chris Carson. back when he was tearing everybody up. They shut down Nick Chubb the second time. I think the big thing for Tennessee is, can A.J. Brown win the matchup against either Peters or Humphrey? If he can't, how does Tennessee move the ball? If he's shut down one-on-one, Baltimore's going to stack that box. I mean, it's going to be a tough day for Henry. I know that New England tried to do it, but that game changed when Patrick Chung left. Antoine, so right now I'm on Texans in the under, but if Fuller is out, I'm probably on Kansas City, but I think Fuller plays as of right now. A.J. Brown is being overlooked. So A.J. Brown is interesting. What worries me about A.J. Brown is that he was shut down by Marshawn Lattimore 2 weeks ago. So looking at A.J. Brown, when he's faced really bad corners,
we all use our cell phones very differently.
Why the French family?
When he's faced really bad corners, he's had big games. So he faced Houston twice, went over 100 yards in those games. He faced Oakland, who has some of the worst corners in football. But looking at when he faced pretty good defenses, so when he faced New Orleans, he had 2 targets. When he faced the Colts, who have a decent secondary, he had 4 targets for 45 yards. So it's a concern. It's when he faced Buffalo against Tre'Davious White, he had 27 yards. So I'm concerned in general that, and last week against New England, he had 1 target. So for me, A.J. Brown is not there yet. I like the player quite a bit, but yeah, Donnie, surprise stream. We're in Vegas with the Football Guys retreat here. But A.J. Brown to me is a matchup type guy. I don't like the matchup. Baltimore is one of the best secondaries in football. So looking back at some of these, Antoine Murphy. So you're going back to Thielen over who? Hyde is, I prefer Hyde over Duke Johnson, especially on FanDuel. On DraftKings, Duke is, I don't like Duke. If you want to take him in a GPP format, fine, but he's a guy who's not getting the touches. So for me in cash game as a running back, I'm looking at, is the guy going to get enough touches? And he's had 1 game this year where he's had over 5 receptions, and he's only had 3 games this year where he's had 5. So I think the downside for Duke Johnson is pretty low. I think that if you want to take him in a GPP flyer, hope the Texans fall behind quite a bit, fine. But I'm not on Duke Johnson this week. Russell or Rodgers? That's a good question. I'm in cash.
More on the Cleveland Browns trade.
I need to stop having so many ESPN pop-ups come up. But in cash, the answer is Russell Wilson, just because I like Aaron Jones so much. And Rodgers has been extremely disappointing. I know he threw for 300 yards in week 17, but he hasn't thrown for over 250 since October besides that game. So if you're just looking for consistency, I think that Russell Wilson is the play. Yeah, Antoine, Chiefs D has improved. Chris Jones was out that game, but Chris Jones is also questionable. So I think he plays, but I think Hyde should still be able to do enough there. Agree, Donnie, that they don't get him at the ball enough, and Hyde is getting all the goal line work. Thoughts on Thielen with the ankle injury? I touched on it a little bit. If it wasn't for the ankle injury, I would love Thielen. With the ankle injury, I think he's probably not in consideration for me for cash games this week. Looking at DraftKings, he's 6,200. I'll either find a way to pay up for a guy like Tyler Lockett, or go down to, like I mentioned earlier, I love Emmanuel Sanders. I love Deebo Samuel. the way I'm handling Will Fuller and Kenny Stills, on FanDuel, I'm leaving $100 on the table so that I can easily go up to Stills if he's out. On DraftKings, it's an easy switch. So Fuller if you guys remember, he dropped 3 touchdowns against Kansas City earlier this year. And Juan Thornhill, the rookie safety who's had a really good year, is out. He was placed on IR in week 17. So I think this is a great opportunity for Fuller to get behind this Kansas City secondary. So looking at some of these questions, top 3 high-risk plays to win a tournament. Number 1 is DK Metcalf. I think that Metcalf over the last 2 weeks has been tremendous, I think. So looking at Metcalf's last 2 weeks, he 160 yards last week, 81 yards the week before, scored a touchdown in both, and has been a target monster in that offense. I think that he will be under-owned just because of how the salaries work out. The other guy I kind of like at quarterback is Jimmy Garoppolo. I talked about the receivers that I like. You could go with a stack. You could go with a stack in San Francisco, and at 5,600 on DraftKings allows you for a ton of options. You could go with a Garoppolo, Dalvin Cook, Aaron Jones lineup with either Debo or Emmanuel Sanders. So I think that that's another guy. And then let's pull up our ownership projections here really quick. Cooperate here in this hotel. Ownership. So looking down the board a little bit, I don't like too many low-end running backs. I think that most of the value is at the top. Going down, so we have DK Metcalf at 10% on DraftKings. I think that that's interesting. Will Fuller at 13.8 is interesting. Adam Thielen at 8%. I mean, as a GPP play, I think he's tremendous. I think Will Fuller will be higher than 13%, especially if he's active. We have Kenny Stills at 7%. So I think if Fuller's active, a lot of that ownership does get to Fuller, which puts him in the 18 to 20% range. But looking at your top 3, I think it's Metcalf, I think it's Thielen, and I think it's Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. Looking at tight end, very similar to running back, I don't like a lot. I like Kelce, I like Kittle, I like Andrews, but those are the top 3. Jacob Hollister's an okay guy to go down a little bit. But after that, you're not looking at much. You're looking at Jimmy Graham, Jonnu Smith, Kyle Rudolph. At that point, you're just hoping for a touchdown, which I don't really like to play that game at the tight end position. So for me, it's Kelce, Andrews, Kittle, Hollister in that order. Recent quarterback Chiefs have faced Trubisky, Locke, Carr, Brady, Rivers twice. Yeah, they really haven't played anybody. I don't mind Deshaun Watson and Cash if you had to go down there, but it's more of a GPP game stack type scenario. If Fuller plays, you're all in. Me too. Tyreek Hill, Mr. Mike's daddy. Hill has got to be a lock button play. I disagree. He's a good play, but to me, as I'm building a lineup, he's not a must play. If I'm playing Lamar Jackson, if I'm playing Aaron Jones, if I'm playing Travis Kelce, even if I went with like the Titans defense, it's tough, if not impossible, to fit in Tyreek Hill. So Tyreek Hill and Cash for me this week, I think they're safe. It's not something that I'm looking at, but I don't mind it. Yeah, hit the like button if you haven't. It's something that I want to do heading into really all of next year. What do I like on FanDuel? I like a lot. We've been talking about So what site? So looking at let's be site specific here, guys. We're working on FanDuel and DraftKings. Mahomes on DraftKings we have as the highest owned player at 22%, and we also have him at 25% on FanDuel. Lamar Jackson is right behind there. I think it's lineup construction based. To me, I'm going Lamar Jackson on both, simply because the savings that I get, the 900 savings on DraftKings, and it's about that on FanDuel, isn't enough for Jackson's upside. We talked about Marquise Brown potentially having a tough day. I do like Andrews, but I think Lamar Jackson's going to run the ball quite a bit this week. So I would go Lamar Jackson there. So as you guys continue to ask those questions, I'll break down some of these other games really quickly. Looking at the Texans and the Chiefs, we've talked about this game a lot, but I like this game. Gary and Conley. Conley was traded off of Oakland. If you look at Houston's secondary, it's largely a group that has been put together as cast-offs. So Gary and Conley was traded away from Oakland. Vernon Hargreaves out of the slot was traded away from Tampa Bay. If you're traded away from Oakland and Tampa Bay, you're not that good of a corner. So Hargreaves, he might have been cut, actually. He was cut. So he was cut from Tampa Bay, which tells you a lot out of the slot. So if you want to take a deep shot on Sammy Watkins out of the slot, I think it's not the worst play, but I think Tyreek Hill's just tough because I do really like Kelce. Looking at what they've done against tight ends. Houston has allowed the 9th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends, including a big game to Noah Fant. Jonnu Smith had 60 yards. Eric Ebron had 70. I know that they played well against Kelce earlier this year, holding him to 58 yards, but I think it's a scenario where the Chiefs have utilized Kelce more recently. And Tyreek Hill had 5 for 80 and 2 touchdowns the first time these teams met. That was without Sammy Watkins. He didn't play in that game. I think you're kind of hoping for a similar game. I think that Tyreek Hill gets 70 to 80 yards. The question will be whether or not he gets in the end zone. I look at it as Kelce having a better chance comparison. And what I mean by that is at the tight end position, there's just not many options. At the wide receiver position, there are a number of options. So, you look just like 400. I think that's a really good price. Devontae Adams at 78 is Tyreek Hill. If you can afford either of the two, I think it's difficult to afford them, but if you could, I think it's a great spot. And then looking further down, you have Diggs at 5,600, which is a good price. Emmanuel Sanders at 5,400. Deebo Samuel at 52. Will Fuller at 5,000. So I look at it at the wide receiver position as a much deeper position compared to the tight end position this week. So that's where I'm going with the Chiefs. Damian Williams we have as one of the most popular plays this week on FanDuel at 47%, and 46% on DraftKings. Damian Williams is interesting. I think that he's a guy who, I'm not really sure why he's that highly. Houston's defense has been bad across the board recently, but they allowed Derrick Henry to run for 211 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's probably skewing it a little bit. But even without that Derrick Henry game, let me run the number here really quickly. So if we exclude that Derrick Henry week, Houston has still allowed the 12th most to running backs. But at 46%, that's far too high for Williams. If you want to play him in cash, I think he's a great cash game play. I think he'll probably have 80 yards, potentially score a touchdown. But there's also the downside there that he doesn't do that. So can you play Adams and Jones in cash? Yes, I think that Green Bay runs enough of their offense through those two players that you can definitely run that through. Hollister and the Texans or Rudolph and the Packers D. DK tournament. It's a good question. I think either of those tight ends in a tournament, you're looking for a touchdown. And to me, Hollister just, what does he have? 3 touchdowns on the year? Yeah, 3 touchdowns in the year. And I don't think he scored one in since November 11th, where Kyle Rudolph has 6 touchdowns on the year. Let's look at targets really quickly. Red zone targets. So looking at red zone targets, you have Hollister has 9 red zone targets compared to Rudolph has 12. I'm going Rudolph in the Packers in that one, Kim. I think that in a tournament setting, if this was into the end zone, so I'm going Rudolph and the Packers there. Hill or Kelsey in cash. I think I answered that. It was Kelsey. Why do I like Minnesota's D? Because they're cheap. I think Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin get to Garoppolo at least a couple times, and I'm trying to save money somewhere. Maybe they'll get a strip sack, but it's really that I don't like any of the defenses this week, so I'm going with a cheap team that has a pass rush. Yeah, Pablo, you can play Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews in cash. Should you fade Williams affordable 20? 100% agree, Eric. 100% agree with this one. The ownership projection, the ownership is just too high in GPPs for me. But if you want that safety, I can't blame someone to say, you know what, I'm going to just take it and just say it's a free square this week. But in cash, I think he's more than affordable, and he's in a great spot. Should you fade Adams in cash for Hill? I prefer Adams there. Let's just rank them. Looking at, I will rank them Packers 1. No, Ravens 1, Packers 2, Chiefs 3. You're all Xavier Rhodes should step it up. I don't know about that. I think he's been one of, if not the worst corners in football. I think that the safeties for the Vikings will have to step up if it's one of those. I mean, they have some of the best safeties in the league. Van Bostic, Williams and Jones together. And I'm assuming that's Damian Williams and Aaron Jones. I'm cool with that. So let's break down the Texans real quick as you guys can continue to ask your questions. The only thing I ask is just put a site in there. Some of these plays are site specific. So looking at Houston, I think that this entire game depends on the health of Will Fuller. It's a matter of if Will Fuller plays, I think he is one of my favorite plays this week. Simply because Juan Thornhill is out and they are playing Armani Watts at safety. Armani Watts is a 4th-round pick from 2018. He really has not seen much action. He had 48 snaps last week and hasn't played since then. So it's a severe downgrade at free safety. and he should see Fuller should see a lot of Bashaud Breeland, who Breeland is not the player that he once was. So it's a scenario in which you're going to have a brand new safety going against a corner who has struggled for most of the year, much like Xavier Rhodes, where he's kind of fallen off from that. I'm assuming that's the case because I believe that Charvarius Ward, who's been good, we'll see a lot of DeAndre Hopkins this week. So I think Fuller gets 4 or 5 deep shots. We saw him drop 3 touchdowns earlier this year against the team. I think Deshaun Watson's in a great spot as a GPP play. There's definitely a scenario in which Houston falls behind early, and you could go with a Kelsey, Damian Williams, Will Fuller type of GPP lineup that the game script would indicate that if they fall behind, or you could even go with a DeAndre Hopkins in that as well. So if they fall behind, we've seen Houston where Deshaun will ran for a touchdown or 2 in that game and was one of the top quarterbacks that week. So if Kansas City gets out early, that game stack probably wins tournaments. So I think it's incredibly interesting. Why aren't you higher on Jimmy Graham? Just don't trust that offense. It's not an offense I like. I mean, Jimmy Graham, here's the number of catches he's had since November. 2, 1, 1, 3, 1, 1, 4. Hasn't scored a touchdown since October 20th. Hasn't topped 50 yards since November 10th. He's just not a part of the offense right now. At 33, he's showing that he's slow. He's showing that he's kind of towards the end of his career. And at his price, what is he? He's 3,300 on DraftKings. At 3,300, I prefer Kyle Rudolph to him. Could he fall in the end zone twice? Sure. I think that Graham is a potential red zone threat. But looking at the red zone targets that we had pulled up earlier, he has 10 red zone targets, and he's only caught 5 of them. So I prefer Rudolph there. Who will guard the San Francisco receivers? That's a really good question. The way I think it's going to go, it's not going to be a shadow scenario. So it's going to be based on the side that they line up. I think that Deebo Samuel will see more of Xavier Rhodes than Emmanuel Sanders will, just because Sanders plays in the slot and then plays on the outside as well. And Sanders lines up more on the side of Trey Waynes than Rhodes, but they move their receivers around all over the field. So I think that it'll be Samuel and Cash. They're cheap. That's all I got to say about them. If you need defense this week, there aren't really a lot of great defenses. I think Baltimore, if you can afford them, great, but I think it's really difficult to do so. And even with Baltimore, I think it's a scenario in which their upside is kind of limited, because what does Tennessee want to do? They want to run the ball, and you don't really get points for a defense if they're running 30 times. So it's a scenario in which I think it's tough to pick a defense, and it's why I'm on Minnesota. But San Francisco should be fine. Really, any defense is fine. I'm just going cheap this week. So looks like we're caught up on question. Which hotel is this crap Wi-Fi? I'm at the Park MGM. Apologies for the Wi-Fi if I'm cutting in and out. But I can try a hot spot tomorrow or something to. But I think most Vegas hotels aren't set up for streaming. So looking at this, what are we on now? We're on the Packers. The Packers run their offense through two players, and that's Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams. Can we trust Aaron Rodgers? I don't think so. I think that the only way that makes sense is if they're playing from behind, which because we've seen games in which they're close, it seems like they want to come out and establish the run early, and throw when they need to. So they're not a top offense as far as pass. We'll see a lot of Trey Flowers who and Adams moves all over the field, but the corners for if this will load. Allowing 163 yards per game to wide receivers. They've allowed 100 yards or more to, let's see, a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 receivers have. Trey Flowers has struggled out of the slot. Ugo Amadi has been playing recently. And then Shaq Griffin on the other side of the ball. But Shaq Griffin doesn't really shadow anybody. So not that concerned. I think Alan Lazard will see a lot of Shaq Griffin. So I think Adams and Jones are both in play. Jones is my favorite guy on this slate. I think that the volume that he's seeing and the talent that he has, this really front seven. So the way to beat Seattle is on the ground. They have Bobby Wagner, they have KJ Wright, but they've allowed a lot of big plays to running backs. So just pulling this up really quickly. Kenyon Drake, we saw a couple weeks ago, have 166 yards and 2 touchdowns. Christian McCaffrey had 87 and 2. And Christian McCaffrey also had 88 yards with 8 receptions. So they've allowed not only yards on the ground, but they're also allowing quite a bit of receiving opportunities for running backs. Devontae Freeman had 8 receptions. Alvin Kamara had 9 receptions. So I think this is a scenario where Green Bay comes out and when they throw it, they're going to throw it to 2 players. They're going to throw it to Adams and Jones, which we've seen most of the year. But Jones is my favorite guy in this slate and the guy that I'm forcing into my lineups. As a GPP play, Graham is in play. Yeah, just like all of the cheap tight ends, you're hoping for a touchdown, and he's involved enough in the red zone to see those opportunities. Tevin Coleman is a GPP flyer. Not. Yeah. The touches aren't there. At 5 carry. Now the only way that works, I think, is if Mostert gets hurt. We've seen Breida have 4 touches. We've seen Coleman have 5 carries. It's a Raheem Mostert type scenario to me, unless you guys have seen otherwise, where in the last hour or so. Contrarian plays to fade all 3 top tight ends. Yeah, I think most people are going to go to those top 3. Will I be doing a hot food challenge in Vegas again this year? No, absolutely not. I don't want to throw up and spend an entire night in rough shape. but glad you remembered that. What about Williams? What about him? He's back, but is he healthy? Before he got hurt, he sort of lost that opportunity. He's had 6 carries, 8 carries, 7 carries. Very similar to Tevin Coleman. I like him a little bit better than Tevin Coleman just because I think that he'll see more touches, but not for me. This week for me, it's all about spending up at quarterback, which I'm in cash. In GPPs, I'm probably fading Lamar Jackson. At running back, I'm going Aaron Jones and then a combination of Damian Williams, Carlos Hyde, and what was my fourth one? Let me pull it up really quickly. Damian Williams, Aaron Jones, and Raheem Mostert. And then at wide receiver, it's going cheap for the most part. It's your Deebo Samuels, Emmanuel Sanders, Will Fullers. And then tight end in cash, I'm playing Travis Kelce everywhere. I don't mind Mark Andrews, and then George Kittle's right behind him. If you want to go cheap, go with Jacob Hollister in cash and Kyle Rudolph in a GPP. Do I think Williams is going to hurt Aaron Jones at all? I don't think he'll have 25 carries like he did last week or week 17, but I think that Jones is still going to have 17 to 19 carries. I look at the top end of running backs, and Derrick Henry is going to see the most, which I think Dalvin Cook is a tremendous GPP play this week. If you can afford him in cash, it's an okay matchup. It's actually a decent matchup against San Francisco, who's allowing, I think, 4.3 yards per carry this year. But there's a scenario in which the Vikings fall behind early, which has me off of Cook and cash. But I think in GPPs, he's a great play. I think they're going to try and run the ball quite a bit this week to protect their corners. And then where were we? So tight ends I talked about, and then defenses, I'm just picking one. I'm just going cheap. So I'm on the Vikings, but I think any of the defenses are fine. Can you play Tyreek Hill and Damian Williams in cash? You can, but you're probably, if you look up one, Pablo, you said Jones is a lock in cash. So I'm curious how you could go Tyreek, Williams, and Jones and have a lineup that you like the rest of the way. So I have about 10 minutes and then I got to jump off here. So get in your final questions here. And I'll go through this. Yeah. It's a great GPP play. I think that we saw it last week where even Travis Homer's not the option. He had 11 carries for 12 yards. On FanDuel, I don't see a scenario in which you can play Homer. On DraftKings, the hope is that Homer catches 4 or 5 balls like he did back in week 17. As the way to beat Green Bay is they have a very strong defensive tackles up the middle in Zadarius Smith and Kenny Clark. They can be beaten on the outside, but it's going to be a lot of Russell Wilson. It's going to be a lot of DK Metcalf, and it's going to be a lot of Tyler Lockett. Lockett I prefer in cash just because he's cheaper than DK Metcalf, and I think he's a now that he's had two back-to-back big games, and the safeties for Green Bay are good. So Adrian Amos is one of the top free safeties in the league, and they play two free safeties, which is interesting. They don't play too strong. They don't have a strong safety in their dime package, which is their primary package. So, which should make the day difficult for Jacob Hollister. So looking at the tight end position, Green Bay is right in the middle of the pack. So Hollister's a guy who's averaging 8 yards per catch. It's far too low for someone who is only going to see 5 or 6 targets, 7 targets at most. So you're hoping for a touchdown, but we talked about it earlier where he only has three on the year and I think 7 or 8 red zone targets. So I prefer Kyle Rudolph if you're going to go that low. So for me, looking at the Seahawks, Russell Wilson is a great GPP play. Tyler Lockett, I think, is more of a cash play. DK Metcalf, I'm spending up as a GPP play. All right, so going through the last questions here before I sign off. Thank you all for joining. We have about 85 people in here, which is more than I expected for a surprise stream. Do I try to play someone from each game? No, I don't. I don't look at it that way. I probably have someone from each game. So looking at each game in my cash lineup right now, I Emmanuel Sanders, and I don't have anyone from the Vikings. I have some other lineups that have some Vikings in there. Titans, Ravens, I have Lamar Jackson in cash. I think that's it. It is. Texans, Chiefs, I have Will Fuller. I have some Damian Williams. I have Travis Kelce, and I have Carlos Hyde. Seahawks and Packers, I have Tyler Lockett, and I have one lineup with the Seahawks defense in there as well, which I think is a sneaky play down pretty low. Just because we've seen where Rodgers holds on to the ball for far too long at times. And if the Seahawks can get ahead early, I think that it puts the Packers in a bad situation. I do like the Vikings defense more than the Seahawks. It's just the way that it worked. The Seahawks were slightly cheaper on FanDuel. Thoughts on Watkins, Hopkins, Fuller stack, run it back with Kelce and Williams. So let's just think this through real quick. How does that win? It wins with the Chiefs. I do like it. And that's kind of how I evaluate GPP lineups is in what scenario does this put up enough points to win? So I think that this lineup puts up enough. You're gonna want Kansas City to get up 14-17 with Kelce having a big Kelce or Williams. Probably Kelce because Williams is going to be highly owned and it doesn't help you that much. But Kelce, and if Kelce comes out and scores early, then I think that you're in really good shape there. Cecil and Bloom are great guys. Hopefully we'll get them on here later. I'm going to actually be meeting up with them here in the next 10 minutes or so. So as I walk over to the Luxor. Appreciate it. Wasn't expecting anyone to show up. And if you haven't hit the subscribe button, please do. We're constantly trying to give away things, and as the season winds down, get ready. This content isn't going to stop. I know that Cecil and Bloom have streams throughout the year. So, but with that, if there's no more questions, we'll see everyone later today. Probably we'll probably do something where we walk around maybe at a halftime of one of the games. If you haven't, I'll keep everyone up to date on my Twitter account. which I'm posting now. Probably just what we're doing and if we're going live or those types of things. So let me post that really quickly. I'm logging off. And it's not that I like the Vikings. It's just they're so cheap. And when you're trying to play Lamar Jackson and you're trying to play Aaron Jones and you're trying to play Travis Kelce, there's not much salary left. So that's the reality. I wish I could play a defense that was a little more expensive, but I can't. So, yeah. So follow along there. I'm sure Cecil or Sigmund will post something too, and we'll be back on later. So thank you all. Have a good day. Good luck. Good luck this week. I hope someone wins a GPP if I can. So.